We appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and since we do have a quorum, I will ask for approval of the December 13 minutes.
Madam Chair, I move that we receive and accept the minutes from the December meeting.
Do I have a second? I will second that. Minutes are approved. All right. Oh, all those in favor, sorry. Are you just present or are you? Are there any opposed to the minutes for the December 13th? Well, I have 2 ayes where the people on WebEx tell me if they're willing to vote for the minutes.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Senator Warren votes yes.
Okay, then we have 4 voting yes and 3.
Representative Wagner votes yes.
Senator Faust-Godot votes yes.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
since I wasn't here, may I be recorded as abstaining?
absolutely. Please record Senator Francisco as abstaining from voting. Pardon me?
Madam Chair,
Representative Valdina Wynn votes yes. Yes, Senator.
Did you hear my vote?
Yes, I did. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
We got you counted.
Thank you.
Barb, did you get Representative Wagner as a yes?
Yes, I did. Thank you very
Okay.
much, Representative. All right, that looks like that's 6 to 7, 6 to 1. Sorry, 6 to 1. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. All right. Welcome back to the 2023 session. Guess who I get to play with at these meetings? All right, so it's minutes past 6 to 0. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I would like to welcome Sandy Pritchett, Executive Director of the Real Estate Appraisal Board.
On behalf of the Appraisal Board, to address any questions you may have concerning our regulation changes to KAR 1177-1 and KAR 11720-4. They are both fee increases. One is for our appraisers for their annual renewal fee. That would be an increase of $50 annually per appraiser. The other one is a request for an increase for the appraisal management companies of $200 per year per appraisal management company. And this was kind of recommended through the budget committees the last couple of years that our fee fund was getting a little short. But also working with the budget analyst, we are going to run out of fees or money eventually. I would like to point out that in 2011, our fees were $275 a year for appraisers annually to renew. And then, the board started dropping that. So they went the next year down to $250, the following year, $225, $200. And then we've been maxed out. We've been lowered to $150 since 2015. So it's been almost 10 years since we've done anything with our fees. And I guess I'm really just here to answer any questions or concerns you all may have.
Thank you. Did you give your name for the WebEx
Sally Pritchett,
And your position?
and the director
There you go.
of the Kansas Real Estate Appraisal Board.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Ms. Pritchard. I'd like to direct your attention to the proposed Reg 117-20-4 and in particular subparagraph E as in Edward. And it looks like for the most part, what this is actually doing is changing an acronym to what the true word is, AMC, to Appraisal Management Company. Am I interpreting that correctly?
You are, and I'm apologize if that was missed somewhere.
No, that's just fine. The existing regulation, it would appear, though, provides the AMC, which will, assuming this is adopted, it would read the Appraisal Management Company, Federal Registry fee in any amount assessed by the Appraisal Subcommittee of the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council for all AMCs holding a registration. I suppose a drafting concern I might have is that we're getting rid of the acronym in the first line of sub E, and in the fourth line, we're continuing to, or excuse me, in the third line, we're continuing to use the acronym without the acronym being defined. Is there any problem that you see in that manner of drafting?
Now that you've pointed it out, I probably would go back and correct that.
Well, and you can still. I don't think that would be a substantial modification of your regulation. You might want to give that some consideration when it's presented for actual adoption or approval. And I may be wrong on that. I'm not the expert on the format of acronyms in administrative regulations. My other concern, or real concern about that paragraph is it looks to me like if this federal registry fee, and by the way, who sets that federal registry fee?
And that is where we have oversight by the appraisal subcommittee. We're kind of, the federal government has set standards for us that we have to follow. And they set out what the federal registry fee is. As all it involves us for is we take the money and we ship it off to the appraisal subcommittee. And if an AMC, appraisal management company, would like to have their people on that registry, they've got to pay a certain fee to the subcommittee. And that's done by giving it to us and then we give it to them.
I infer that the subcommittee is not a subcommittee of your board. It's a subcommittee of some other committee somewhere.
It is it's all part of Title 11. It's part of the Appraisal Foundation. And they have a qualifications board, standards board. But the appraisal subcommittee is the federal entity that has oversight of our board. Like they have they make sure we're in compliance with minimum standards set out by the qualifications board.
So this federal board sets the fee, and then this regulation imposes that fee upon those who want to be registered based upon whatever this federal entity determines the appropriate fee might be.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, does an appraisal management company, in order to practice in Kansas, have to be on the registry, or is that optional?
That was their will in order to, all this happened, but we didn't necessarily want to register appraisal management companies. But in order to do work for the federal government, they had to be registered in a state. And so, the appraisal subcommittee sets out the same standards for appraisers. They have to pay a registry fee each year too.
I'm just saying a Kansas appraisal management company. The only reason they would have to be, I take it, on the registry is if they intend to do federal related work.
In Kansas.
In Kansas, right. But an appraisal management company that doesn't want to be involved with the federal government can go manage their appraisals or do whatever without being on this registry.
We wouldn't even know about them, correct?
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also looking at 117-20-4 appraisal management company. Is that defined elsewhere in statute or regulations?
In statute, and I believe the regulations are a little more clear cut than what you're seeing here, where that what it is defined.
And what was,
And
thank you.
Wait.
What was the change in the law in 2022 that's referenced in subsection E of this regulation? What was the change that is referenced in subsection E there?
well, I don't remember specifically, but we had a regulation that was kind of outdated, had been updated since we did the started registering AMCs. And I'm sorry, I feel like the need to look at you, but
Oh, I
um,
know. Well, maybe
but
it's a
the thing
question.
is what happened is after that day, there were cleanups to the federal law concerning appraisal management companies. And there was a part there where you couldn't take an appraiser off. The appraisal management companies could not take an appraiser off their approved list only for certain reasons. And that had changed, and there was one more reason they could, I believe. And I could find it for you.
And maybe it's a better question for the reviser. Do we know what the change in the law 2022 was that this regulation is addressing? Well, we know it's listed there, but does it require does it require some change in registration or?
Madam Chair, Senator Warren, I'll take a look to see what those exact changes were. I don't have that at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And one other question, if I might, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Sure. In the other regulation 117-7-1, subsection C, the renewal of a certificate or license is increased from $150 to $200. That $50 increase is a 33% increase in fees. Is that increase in the fees mandated anywhere, or is it just something that the board determined?
Apologize for my voice. We are watching our fees, working with the budget analysts and stuff, and eventually we're starting to go down. And it's even been referred when I've been to budget hearings the last couple of years that we might need to look at increasing them. Well, yeah, we are starting to need. I think we're going to run out here in a year or so if we don't increase the fees. And with all the stuff that's been going on in the real estate, the market and things, and all the housing boom we had, we're starting to see a lot more complaints, a lot more of this. Our costs are increasing. And so, yeah, the budget analyst agreed completely because we looked at a $25 increase, and that just didn't seem reasonable either. We don't want to increase it $25 a year for every year. And everybody felt comfortable with $50.
Thank you for that clarification and that explanation. I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do sit on the Senate Transparency and Ethics Committee that reviewed this budget. So I can say that the lowest monthly ending balance for the fee fund in 2021 was $283,600. In 2025, it's projected to be $83,000. So there is a significant, I guess the last 4 years, the expenditures are expected to oversee or exceed the revenue. So I probably was one of those people that said you should look at your budgets. And then the other thing I just want to mention, since we had some discussion of the 11720-4, right after appraisal management company, it has in parentheses AMC and then refers to that later, which is how I always do it when I'm writing. So I don't know that there needs to be any change in that.
Thank you, Senator. That you took the words right out of my mouth.
And if I might toss in there, I missed the parenthetical. That was actually what I was looking for, and I just plain didn't see it. Okay. We're all good. I apologize.
All right. Well, there you got off on that one pretty easily. So how much do you have in unencumbered funds? All agency funds.
At this point, I have no idea. We encumber money because we have reviewers that we contract with, so we really don't know. If Carol, the gal that works with me, was here, she would have a real good idea. But yeah, we'll start. We encumber money for reviewers and other things, of course, but the reviewers are the doubtful ones because we don't know how many complaints or new applicants we're going to get a year. So it's real hard. So we just encumber. It's going to be quite a bit of money. But I think we're getting real close to running out again this year too. So we'll use it all. Does that make any sense?
It does, but I would ask for a follow-up that they bring back some information on that. And then what all does the appraisal board do? Understand the fee fund. I'm asking all agency fee fund. And so I also would like to know, do you do training or continuing ed for these appraisers that you've gotten fees from?
No. The board itself does not. We're a 2-person agency, and we do not typically, I'm not saying years ago we might not have done a training thing, but generally, no, it's not something we do. We have providers who do it. We, not training, but they do continuing ed. The board has no training. We do not train appraisers.
All right, so you pay these other people to do the training, and that's free to the appraisers under your purview.
I'm not sure what you mean training.
Well, a lot of I would think that they would need some updates on whether statutes changed. They would need maybe some help doing something more updated. I think there are a lot of different things that you can do for continuing education or training. Training with cosmetologists would be a hair cutting clinic, or I'm not sure what all your training or continuing ed would be.
Now that's where we have organizations. Everybody know. Okay, listen to me. Everybody knows. You don't know.
Obviously don't.
But I mean, as far as appraisers go, and as far as course providers and people who put on the courses, they know the hot topics going out federally. What's going on? What's changing in the appraisal world? And those are that's the type of education they focus on for their new courses annually. I guess that's probably the best I've got.
Okay. Thank you for your response. So now your agent, the appraisal board is made up of 2 people. Is that what you told me?
2 full-time employees.
Full-time employees, and then how many people are on the board?
7. And we've had 2 vacancies now for several years.
Okay. My mind just went blank on what I was going to ask you. I'll have to come back to that. I'm trying to think. So what exactly do the 2 employees do? I mean, are you just process fees and
we receive applications, review applications to make sure they're in compliance with everything required.
Okay.
Then we approve them. And then we select experience. We review what they've send that out to a reviewer. approve courses, renew, just day-to-day things, handle complaints, hold investigative committee meetings every month to 6 weeks, board meetings every month to 6 weeks. We're actually very busy.
Okay, I'm sure you are. I just needed some information. Thank you very much. Is there anything else for Ms. Pritchard? Pritchard. Oh, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have some information in response to Senator Warren's question regarding the change in the law. So 11724 cites as its authorizing statute 584708, 584709, 584710, and 584725. So the first two, 4708 and 4709, were last amended in 2018. And then 4710 was last amended in 2012. And then 4725 has not been touched since 1990. So in 2018, when 4708 was amended, the changes were made in Senate Bill 419, and it was additional language in subsection A that says the board shall have the authority to collect and remit the National Registry fee for any AMC operating in this state that is exempt from the registration pursuant to KSA 584705 and amendments thereto. And then the changes that can be found in 4709 include anywhere in the statute that said applying an AMC applying for or holding or renewing a registration under this act shall exceed 10% when owned. Instead of 10%, it strikes that 10% and just states B. Another reference is any person who owns more than 10% of interest in an entity. Struck that language, so it just made it any person who owns an interest. And then additionally, later there's another reference that says owns more than 10% in the original. Struck the 10%, just made it an and. So it looks like it now is the person that is subject is now just anyone who owns an interest rather than limiting it to those who own more than 10%. So those were the changes last made to those statutes.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
As I do as well. Did that answer your question, Senator Warren?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for the recitation of the statutes and the authorizing statute. And yes, it did answer the question. Thank you very much.
Okay. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick question. Madam Pritchard, thank you so much for coming here and standing in the fire today. I just wanted to ask a quick question just for me to understand a little bit here. This sounds like, going off of the representative from Wichita, this sounds like you are trying to get compliant with what is coming down federally and increasing your fees to cover a shortfall that you project happening in the future to run your operation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I understand the compliancy side of it. Could you speak on what the effect would be for your members? Because we hear about how there's in the labor force and just folks coming back into the labor force, it looks like these licensures are for the AMCs. Will it have a deleterious effect on how many or the quantity of people that actually refile for these licenses? Will it have a dampening effect on that is what I'm asking if we increase these fees? Thank you, Madam Chair.
I do not believe so. I mean, they're quite aware their fees haven't been increased for 10 years. This was discussed at the board meeting where they decided to increase the fees. And that's made up of appraisers, so they know they're going to have to go back to their industry and kind of explain, we raised your fees. And one of the board members explained it kind of like this, because I don't like to raise fees. We don't want to raise fees, especially with the economy being what it is. But that is why we have to. But they have had such a busy couple of years that they have done quite well with those appraisal licenses. Do you see what I mean? There were good times. You got to take the good with the bad, I guess. That's how kind of the board, I think, looked at it.
All right, are there any other questions? If not, thank you so much for being here to our committee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there someone? Welcome, Senator Tyson. I hear you just got on, so we appreciate you being here. We'll move on now to the Board of Examiners in Optometry. And I believe Jan Murray, Executive Director, is here. If you would introduce yourself when you come up as well for the WebEx people, in case they weren't listening to me.
Okay, I'm Jan Murray. I'm the Executive Officer with the Kansas Board of Optometry, and I'm here to answer any questions you have. The board is wanting to increase their biannual renewal of their license fees from $450 to $550 per every 2 years. So it's averages out to $50 per year if you want to look at it that way. And the last time that we did any fee increases was back in 2004. So we've almost went not quite 20 years without any fee increases. And so.
And that's it.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Well, yeah, we're like everybody else. Expenses have been going up, and so budget, our budget hearings have been kind of harping that maybe you might want to think about raising fees, and so that's where we're at.
All right. Are there any questions from the committee? Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly don't have a great deal of heartburn about raising a registration fee after 20 years by $50. So don't take it that way. But I would observe that in your financial impact statement at the last page under section 3, I believe it is, sub H, that's the part, and we see this with some frequency, but that's the part where it says, describe how the agency consulted solicited information from businesses, associations, local governments, state agencies, or institutions, members of the public that may be affected by the proposed rules and regulations. And it looks like all that you did was you had a discussion about this at the board meeting, and it looks like somebody from the Kansas Optometric Association was in attendance, in other words, watching your meeting. And I'm not certain that really fulfills the intent when we amended this statute to try to require agencies to affirmatively reach out to affected stakeholders and the public. And I don't think we even have to put it in the report, but I just want to mention to you that if this were a larger fee increase, I might have difficulty because I think we really wanted agencies to do more than just discuss this at a board meeting and then say, oh, and by the way, somebody from the association was sitting in the back. Now, there may be additional information that you could share about what you did, but all I have to go with is what's in front of me at this point.
Okay, and I'll be honest, I have not done. We have not had any regulation updates since I think 2015. So this whole process is new to me. So if I didn't do something right, it's probably all on me.
And don't take it that way. I'm just trying in a friendly way to suggest keep that in mind.
And so I did a newsletter here. I think I sent it out earlier this week with and put in that the fee was increased. And the phone calls and stuff that I have been receiving or emails have had nothing to do with the fee increase. It's just like everybody's like, oh yeah, it's and from what the board and some other members, optometrists that I've talked to and mentioned it, it's like, yeah, I'll pay another, $100 every 2 years to keep my license. It's not that big of a deal. So
I know what I'm paying at the optometrist is a lot more than $50 a year increase over what it used to be. So I suspect people aren't too concerned about it. That was just something I wanted to mention to you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any other questions? Representative Penn.
Not to belabor the point, thank you, Madam Chair, but I agree with Representative Carmichael on that is if we're going to put something into legislation, it would be pertinent not just for your house, but for everyone else, that they try to meet the spirit and the letter of the intent. We truly appreciate you all doing that. Thank you.
Which, okay, it is good to know because I do have some more reg updates coming down the pipe. So you'll be seeing something a little bit different than in that paragraph there.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. I'm going to ask you the same question. How much money do you have in your unencumbered funds?
I would have to get back to you on that because I'm really not sure, and I could ballpark it, but it might not even be in the ballpark. So if you don't mind me getting back with you on that.
Not at all. And do you do training? Do you offer training to your licensees?
They get their own training. They're required to get 24 hours of CE training per year. And like the association has training. There's other groups that has training. There's even doctors that, offices that will do like 1 or 2 hours of training that will offer it. We even allow like 4 hours of ophthalmological surgical observation for CE, so they can do that. But as far as what the board does, no, they don't.
How many people are in your office?
One,
How many? Just you.
just me.
You're the Lone Ranger on that.
Yeah. And so don't ask me what I do because I do everything. If I don't do it, it doesn't get done, which makes it real easy on phone calls because somebody will say, well, so-and-so told me, or somebody told me. It's like, it was me. So what did I tell you?
Very good. Well, thank you for being here. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you. Just for context and reference, roughly how many licensees do you have?
We have approximately 730, which is up from when I first started with the board 12 years ago. So
It's just kind of interesting to think about the number of administrative employees to regulate 700 professionals, and sounds like a pretty good ratio to me. So,
and they went, I think in 2010, they went to biannual just to keep, because it used to be
biannual registration.
Yep, every 2 years. So just to break it up some.
Thank you for educating me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is there anything else? Thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is the Kansas State Board of Healing Arts. And Cody, I'm going to slaughter saying your last name. I don't know whether it's Bibo or
we just say Bebout. So
Bebout. Okay. Well, I'm looking at it and it is a little French looking, so I was going to try to do it the right way. Thank you for being here. Reintroduce yourself for us, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair and honorable committee members. My name is Cody Bebout, Assistant General Counsel of the Kansas State Board of Healing Arts. And I'm here today for your consideration and comment of proposed regulation KAR 100-54-13, implementing KSA 65-5423, also known as 22 SB 440, which was passed last legislative session. So for some quick context, kind of going off some of the questions that were just asked, the board, or the KSBHA, license regulates 16 different healthcare professions, including occupational therapists. And we have something along the lines of 33,000 licensees. So KSA 65-5423, again, that's SB 440 from last session, requires that licensed occupational therapists maintain professional liability insurance coverage and orders the board to set minimum levels of coverage for that insurance. And before you for your consideration is KAR 100-5413, as I said, which sets individual policy limit minimums at $100,000 per claim and $300,000 for the annual aggregate. And for an additional insured policy, the minimum limits are the industry standard of $1 million and $3 million. I will note that there is an identical temporary version of this regulation that is effective and was approved by the State Rules and Regulations Board on January 6, 2023. With that, I'm willing to stand for questions.
All right. Are there any questions for Mr. Bebout? Yes, Representative Carmichael.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Bebout. Have we seen you before?
No, sir.
Well, welcome to the committee. This is a real joyous place, I'm sure.
Glad to be here.
We have a state representative now who used to come to this committee, and he told me how much he didn't like coming to our committee. And I guess that's why I ran for the legislature. But that was an aside. The statute that we passed, I think it allows for some independent practice by occupational therapists. Is that correct?
It does, yes, sir.
Without orders, etc., from a physician.
Yes, I don't have it in front of me, but
Right.
it's within some pretty confined limits. Yes.
And that statute, did it give the board full discretion to establish limits, or did it require certain minimum limits on liability,
Yes.
malpractice liability?
The statute itself does not say what the limits could be or minimums, anything like that. The statute specifically says the board shall fix by rules and regulations the minimum level of coverage for such professional liability insurance. And
so in your testimony, you indicated that the coverage that is required when the occupational therapist is practicing as a part of a group or a practice, etc., was the industry standard of 1 million per claim, 3 million in the aggregate in any given year, I assume. Did I understand you correctly?
That's correct.
And that industry standard is not specifically the industry standard for occupational therapists. I think that's the required limitations for physicians. Am I remembering that generally correctly? Maybe you can help me.
I think you're right. When we talked to the insurance company we talked to, they just said industry standard. So I think they had it in mind, hospitals or any other kind of practice that might have an OT that works there. They would have an umbrella, or you can use other words for an additional insured policy.
Okay, so it was your or the board's understanding after talking to an insurance agent that in hospital practice, the required limits as the industry standard for an OT are 1 million, 3 million. Is that correct?
Well, so what we understand is that would be the minimum that a practice might have, not specifically for an OT, but for an additional insured policy that they would fall under. So it's like an umbrella coverage, but that's just the minimum. It's going to change, of course, depending on how big the entity is, that kind of thing.
But if the same occupational therapist is practicing on their own without any supervision or, for that matter, assistance by perhaps their employer or other OTs in a practice, what the board proposes is a limit of 100, 300, meaning 100, no more than 100, that the insurance company will pay no more than $100,000 for any one act and no more than $300,000 in either a given year or a policy term. Is that your understanding?
Yes, that's correct. And one thing to know about OTs as far as insurance goes is they are generally a lower risk population. So there's not lots of claims. It's not like medical malpractice or something like that, though I don't have numbers for that.
Of course, you understand that just because the frequency of claims per patient may be less for an occupational therapist than, say, perhaps a physician or brain surgeon, an obstetrician in particular, probably. For the individual who's injured, that's small consolation, because it looks to me like an occupational therapist in private practice on their own is going to have 1/10 of the available malpractice coverage as if I go see an occupational therapist who's practicing as part of a group or in a hospital. Is that really what the board is proposing here?
So the one thing to think about with the 1 million, 3 million, again, that is for the whole organization. So it's an umbrella coverage. But like I said, OTs are
not an umbrella coverage. Umbrella coverage is something quite different. It's primary coverage, I believe.
Well, it covers a group of employees or that.
It covers the business entity that's known as the employer, plus its employees within the course and scope of their employment. Is that what you're understanding?
As far as I know, sure.
Okay. Well, what I'm trying to figure out is if I go into a group practice, it looks to me like of occupational therapy, and for some reason something goes wrong and I get hurt and it's the occupational therapist's fault. And I know that doesn't happen with great frequency, but when it does, there's going to be $1 million worth of coverage. But if I go into an individual standalone practice with no supervision, there's only going to be $100,000 in available malpractice coverage. 1/10 the coverage. I'm trying to figure out why. Why would you want to require far, far less insurance for someone who's practicing on their own, who arguably might have a higher risk of negligence than someone in a group practice?
Sure. I don't know that I have a specific answer to that. I appreciate the question. We consulted our OT council that advises the board. We consulted an insurance company. We talked to the KOTA, and then finally the board. And these are the limits that we were told were adequate for a lower risk population such as OTs. And of course, they can always get more insurance if they like, that kind of thing.
Well, $100,000 per claim or per incident is less money than less coverage than I carry on my car. And I'm trying to figure out why you would want to set the mandatory minimum limit of liability so low. Can you explain that to me?
So you're probably not going to like my answer maybe because it's repetitive, but when we talked to an insurance company, they said for this population and for individual coverage, that was adequate coverage. Now the difference, the 1/10 versus not, the 1 million, 3 million is just the kind of industry standard minimums for bigger organizations. So it's not like that would necessarily be put lower, if that makes sense.
What insurance company did you talk to?
We talked to Camco.
Talked to their underwriting department, their production department, their claims department. Who did you all consult at Camco to determine that $100,000 was enough coverage?
So I don't have it in front of me who we talked to originally. Let me see if I have that. But we talked to, actually, I'm not sure of her title, but it was one of the executives, as far as I understand.
Well, I don't want to take more of the committee's time on this, but I think this is woefully, woefully underinsured. And that's not to the benefit of patients. And if you've ever been a professional like me who's had a claim, you will certainly wish that you had more than $100,000 in malpractice coverage. Thank you.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the testimony provided in committee today. My question is for those following along, either in the committee meeting room or online for the public, could you define briefly what an occupational therapist is licensed to do, what kind of service they provide?
So that's a great question. I don't have a good definition right in front of me. Generally, what they're going to do is help with therapies and interventions to help people with day-to-day activities, get back to their job. I know we have some that work in schools that help with educational needs, that kind of thing. If you're looking for a more specific answer, I apologize. I can't think of a specific intervention, but that's generally kind of what they will do.
Thank you. And do you have any statistics on how often claims for malfeasance or negligence are filed against licensed occupational therapists in Kansas?
I don't have that information in front of me, but I'd be glad to follow up if that's okay.
I'd appreciate that. And thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for answering the questions.
Senator, it's come to my attention that occupational therapist is defined within the statutes. So perhaps while we keep the committee meeting going, maybe you could send the definition to the committee. Would that be? Thank you. I would appreciate that. Are there any more questions? If not, thank you so much for being here, and we'll move on.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dan Riley, Chief Legal Counsel from Division of Wildlife and Parks.
Good
Welcome.
morning, Madam Chair. I am Dan Riley, Chief Counsel for Wildlife and Parks. We have 3 regulations before the committee today. 2 of those are amendments and 1 is a new regulation. The first one on the list today is KAR 115.8-9, which is a camping regulation. And the basic changes in this regulation relate only to public lands. They don't relate to state park camping. And the change that takes place in this regulation is to cut the number of allowable camping days from 14 to 7 for ordinary campers. That change is based upon difficulties that we've had in terms of maintaining those areas. We've had some people that have honestly taken advantage of some of the public lands, which are primitive camping areas. And this is something that we hope will help us keep those more pristine and keep them for the intended use. Any questions on 115.8-9, or would you like me to go through all 3 first and then come back for questions?
I think we have a question from me and as well from Senator Francisco. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, so I appreciate this and understand the intent. My question was on F, which talks about all property unoccupied or unattended for more than 48 hours. So the last part of that, I'm understanding how, or wondering how any unoccupied property could be reclaimed. So I'm just, because if it seems like the land's unoccupied, but the department isn't saying that you can reclaim that property, or are they saying you can reclaim that camping site?
If we had anyone that had property that they wish to reclaim, we would certainly do everything we could to assist with that. That particular provision is intended to hopefully address for the fact that a great deal of stuff is being abandoned at these campsites. In fact, sometimes things as large as vehicles are abandoned, and they don't tend to be vehicles that somebody's going to be looking to reclaim. People are dumping in these areas, and it's become a real burden upon our staff people to try to maintain it, because honestly we're obligated to maintain the property and the pristine nature, and we rely on the folks that use the privilege of camping there to assist us with that, and hopefully this will help support them, because most of the things that are abandoned are not things that people are going to be too likely to come looking for later. It's more like dumping at the site.
I'm sure if I might follow up. I absolutely understand what you're trying to get at, and I think it is property that was unattended or left. And it could be, relating to property that you were not occupying, but I don't think unoccupied property can be returned. So if you just have someone look at that word,
Sure.
That's my question is,
Okay.
How do you return unoccupied property? Thank you.
Thank you. And if I may, one more, and I probably didn't respond as well as I should have there. That may be, and I believe the intent there was to reflect campers and camping equipment that may be left on there. So if someone abandons, and some of these it's sometimes tough to envision some of the things that are abandoned, but some of them were intended to resemble or to function as campers. And I think that's where the unoccupied comes from also. That was intended to encompass if someone abandons something that they've created as a camper on site, it being unoccupied is intended to be part of the abandonment. And I believe that's the intent for that language. I think it makes a little more sense if you think of it in terms of something that could be occupied that may be abandoned.
That is helpful. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
My question was, can you define the difference? Show us what the difference is between state parks and public property. I'm imagining someone pitching a tent on my front yard. So can you just give us a little bit of, I know that the state-owned properties are owned by the state, but what, I'm trying to understand. What are there designated public lands?
Yes.
All right, so
They
that
are
I would know
designated.
that this was a public park. Okay.
Correct. And well, to begin at the beginning, a state park requires a statutory designation to become a state park. It is designated by law as part of the state park system. The public lands are also based on a grant of legislature. And the public lands also include the state fishing lakes. So those properties are not developed to the level of the state parks. And that's why the camping standards are kind of tailored to those particular areas. There are no fees charged for camping on the public lands, the state lakes, or the areas that we're talking about here. They require registration, and most of those registrations are now online. But there's not a fee charge. These tend to be pretty primitive type undeveloped camping. It's not like where you pull up to a concrete slab that's got electricity and the other things that are provided in the state parks.
All right. Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for being here. I have a lot of concern over these rules and regs. They seem far reaching, especially since it's starting to include walk-in hunting. Since when did you regulate that land? Were there rules and regulations on that property?
Well, we are responsible for it since we contract for the use of it.
Madam Chairman, I just think this is an egregious overreach by the department again. I have a lot of concern, not just the 7-day camping. I know individuals that, they telecommute from their camper for months at a time. But when
in those situations, Senator, they can request an extension. It's not an absolute that the standard term would be shortened by this regulation, but there's still a provision by which they can request long-term camping if they are campers within the
more government bureaucracy at its best, and especially, I know several individuals that have many acres in walk-in hunting and have concern over this, and I'm sure they will consider. How does this impact the contract that you signed with them? Are they able to get out of the contract?
Absolutely.
How did they proceed with that? Because I have
notified us that they don't want to be in the walk-in hunting program.
But they signed a 10-year contract and you paid them in advance. That was another thing that is just, who's able to do that? Only Wildlife and Parks. So how does that work? Then they'd have to refund the money?
I assume so. We haven't had that situation come up. And these particular regs were publicly presented at 6 different commission meetings, and we didn't receive any negative comments.
Do you think the landowners were aware of it?
It was published in the Register, and it's been on our website for probably 7 or 8 months.
If I may, Madam Chairman, did you send notices to the landowners?
No, ma'am.
So how would they be aware of this? They're not out there watching your rules and regulations, expecting a change. I mean, you're in the middle of a contract with these landowners and you're changing the parameters in the middle of the game.
That applied to the hunters that utilize those areas.
Right. But those hunters are guests of the landowners. Madam Chairman, I won't belabor it anymore. I've made my point. I'm very disappointed the department's doing this. I would imagine that, we can always take legislative action. It just takes time. But again, the department extremely disappointed.
Are there any other questions? Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With all due respect to my friend Senator Tyson, I can't imagine why a landowner would complain about this. I think the reference is to the proposed, or actually an amendment of the existing KR 115-8-23 bait hunting, which adds a number 1 subparagraph under A, that this regulation shall include those areas designated by the agency as walk-in hunting areas and integrated walk-in hunting areas. And then it says it doesn't apply to fur harvesters, but I'm trying to figure out why any landowner would be upset by the fact that the agency is making some, what looks to me like some reasonable regulations concerning the baiting of animals that are being hunted on walk-in land. I know if it's my land, I wouldn't want bait and decoys left laying around or flooding my crops. I can't imagine why a landowner would have any objection to the fact that the agency is imposing some regulations on walk-in hunters like me to try to keep me from damaging or obstructing the land of the people who place their land into this program. I'm trying to figure out why anybody would ever complain about that. Maybe the senator can help me, because I know you have constituents and they may see things differently, but as a hunter, it looks pretty reasonable to me.
All right, I have an easier question for you.
I mean,
One of the things, we can go back to you, Senator Tyson.
it's your meeting. I mean, I'd be glad to debate it with the representative, but that's not why we're here. And the representative doesn't have the constituency that I do or the experience that I do out in central and western Kansas. And I just have different experiences. I'm sure he's not aware of a constituent just asked me the other day for putting counties on license plates. And ironically, it's the third constituent that had asked for that. I have a feeling that he's never had that request.
Oh, I understand all about counties on license plates, and I think it's a good idea. That way people know when out of county hunters like me that says Sedgwick on the back, when we're out road hunting around their ground. I think it's probably a good idea. But why don't we save this for our discussion of comments, and then maybe the senator can enlighten me as to what's really wrong with the reg.
You offline, but
Yes, thank you very much, both of you. I appreciate that. Now I'll give you my question. Why is there a difference with the public lands, 7 days, and then the state park 14? The only reason I ask you that is because it gets very confusing for people. I don't know if can we stay here 7 days or do we have 14 days?
It tends to be an entirely different group of campers. The state parks are developed campsites. They're where you've got a concrete slab you can back up on and plug in your fifth wheel camper, and they're very much developed campsites with oversight. Park employees frequent the area. There's a check-in place, and those campsites are for a fee. So in terms of the oversight and regulation at the state park level, there's quite a bit in terms of the resources there. The areas that this regulation would deal with are basically primitive that do not resemble that. They don't have the resources developed. They don't have the individuals staffing the area that are available. These tend to be primitive areas that kind of rely to a large sense upon the individuals that are there to maintain the area in the manner in which they found it.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate the answer.
Absolutely.
Did you want to move on?
Absolutely. The next regulation on our
Pardon
list.
me, Senator Francisco had a quick question.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have some suggested wording that I just wanted to change to share with you.
Okay, thank you.
And that would be to change the last sentence in F to any property that was unoccupied, unattended, or abandoned may be reclaimed. So rather than describing it as unoccupied, it's just because that already happened. Anyway, that would make it easier for me to understand.
Absolutely.
That's
Thank you.
just a suggestion.
Very good. Thank you.
We have another question from.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Senator
Just
Tyson.
clarification. In order to change the rules at this point, you would have to go through the process completely. Is that correct?
Any substantial change would require that,
Okay,
yes.
so that would not be considered substantial.
That's kind of a judgment call on an individual regulation basis. So
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify. I'm not sure that Senator was aware of that.
Okay, thank you. You may go on now because I'm not going to look at anybody else to get a question in so you can be done.
thank you. The second reg on our list today involves baiting. That's 115.8-23. And this is one that would apply to walk-in hunting areas, as the senator inquired about earlier. And this is a change that kind of clarifies and eliminates baiting entirely. At one point, we had prohibited baiting for hunting purposes in these areas, and we found that individuals were still placing bait and claiming that it was for other reasons, but in the end, they were actually taking animals over bait that they said that they had placed for photography reasons or other reasons. So we've expanded it to eliminate baiting in all of those areas, which will make it a lot easier for people to comply with, and a lot easier for us to also check the compliance of. Any questions on this one?
Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, or Chairwoman. Madam Chair, I apologize, Representative. Have you had any landowners who are participating in the walk-in hunting program come to you and say, gosh, we really want these walk-in hunters to be able to bring bait onto our land and pour it out and leave it here so that they can try to shoot birds or whatever they're hunting over this walk-in bait, or excuse me, over this bait that we're pouring out on their ground and probably leaving behind when they finish their hunting trips? Anybody come to you and said, gosh, we'd really like to have hunters do that?
No, we have had none of those comments. And in fact, the whole spirit of the walk-in hunting areas are that the land be available for hunting, but it be maintained in the same condition that it was when it was provided for that purpose. So allowing someone to bring something in and leave it there is kind of contrary to the spirit of the intent, where we want to be able to turn the land back over to the landowner at the end of the hunting season and have it be unchanged. We don't want it changed or altered by anyone that's using it. So
the objective is to leave it as clean and in as good a condition at the end of the season as it was at the beginning. Is that what
exactly,
you're trying to do?
and that's why the walk-in requirement is there. It's not intended that it be cut up or rutted up by vehicles or anything else. It maintained in the same shape that we find it.
But if hunters use bait to attract the birds or the deer or whatever's being hunted at the time, and they pour it out on the ground or wherever they do to bait the animals in so that they can hunt, and then they leave it there on the ground, and I don't know how you'd ever clean it all up anyway. Does that then return the ground to the landowner at the end of the season in the same pristine condition that it was found at the beginning?
Not in my opinion, no.
And so does that help? Does that help the department keep people participating in the program if hunters go in and defile their land and leave bait laying around at the end of hunting season?
No.
And so is that what you're trying to stop?
Absolutely.
Okay. This also references fur harvesters. Fur harvesters a little upset with me right now about a particular bill that I've offered. I'm sure you're familiar with it. I offer it every 2 years. But can you explain to us why it is that fur harvesters are being exempted from this regulation?
Absolutely. A fur harvester that chooses to use the walk-in hunting area for that purpose, for trapping, basically would still be allowed to use bait on their traps if they chose to do so. But the distinction, as we have kind of discussed here, is that those articles would not remain there after the trapping season. Though they would be removed with the traps, so there wouldn't be any residue remaining from something that they deposited on the land.
And I certainly didn't mean to be critical of this. In fact, I think it's a good idea because, as you point out, the baiting that goes on in fur harvesting is specific piece of meat or whatever is used in association with the trap. So when you remove the trap, you also remove the unused bait, and therefore the walk-in hunting land is hopefully left in the pristine condition that it was at the beginning of the season.
That's the intent.
Okay. Well, it sounds like a great regulation to me. I'm sorry the senator had to step out and wasn't able to hear the questions and answers. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you. And any other questions on that one, on the baiting?
I don't see any, so you can.
Thank you.
Oh, no, I think he was just, he tends to do that on the floor too. Moving. So that's why I was ignoring him, because I thought, that's right. All right. Go ahead.
Thank you. The
Please.
final regulation we have before you today is KAR 115-8-25, which is one that is a new regulation, and it would prohibit trail and game cameras and other devices on public lands also. This regulation is something that is also in response to a problem that is developed on these areas. The use of trail cams particularly has become so widespread that it has actually impacted the ability of hunters to find a place to hunt. And it's caused so much traffic in the areas in terms of people that are making trips out to these areas to check their trail cams, that wildlife patterns have been altered, and hunting areas that previously were pretty much available are no longer available because the game has either been run out by people that are checking their cameras, or the flow of individuals in there has disrupted the process. So as kind of a quality judgment to maintain the pristine areas and the ability of a hunter to be able to use those as they are intended, we've decided that the best thing to do is to prohibit those devices. And from a fair chase kind of a basis, also in a sporting basis, it honestly makes the hunt more as it's intended to be sporting, and technology tends to take off and go very quickly, and the wildlife don't have the same ability in terms of utilizing technology sometimes, and this is something that we think is appropriate on the lands that the agency controls.
All right. I don't see any questions, and I don't see any hands up online that saying, oh, there's Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, thank you so very much for coming before us today. I wanted to go back and ask one question from the previous discussion on 115-8-23 on the bait piece. I don't see the enforcement mechanism there. What does that look like if someone were to leave bait on this ground on walk-in hunting? How do you enforce that? What's the penalty?
Well, there really isn't an enforcement mechanism. And to be real honest, we don't really have a likely enforcement mechanism that would find the individual there, because these are remote areas. And the likelihood that someone would actually see someone dumping bait out, or that there would be an ability to track or trace what was found to somebody that had been in the area, because the walk-in hunting areas, most of them do not require any prior registration. Some do, some have online registration, but most of those are just based on the individual's integrity as far as using the site. If we saw someone there, or we were able to find out, then it's a violation generally of a regulation. So there's a mechanism where that could be actionable, but specifically for this regulation, it doesn't have its own enforcement mechanism.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for that. Madam Chair, may I ask one other?
Yes,
It is actually unrelated to the business that's before us today, but I've had a couple of constituents reach out to me, so I want to take an opportunity with you here, talking about the tagging for whitetail. Could you speak on that? What is your department's feel for the increasing in the I think there's some legislation that's out pertaining to that, if you're familiar with it, just like
There are actually several bills that have been introduced. I don't know that I really understand.
well, it goes along with what you're saying here on the trail game camera, other devices, the advantage or disadvantage, I believe, to the wildlife and the spirit of sport. I think that there's some concern about whether or not the season would be extended into certain weeks, and the number of or the type of permits that could be tagged that could be given out.
Well, the method that we use to assess and determine the best or the most appropriate season or the bag limits or those things are based on research that we do ongoing all year long. Is based on research that we compile and is ongoing during the year. We have biologists that are assigned to each species that collect data and information and make those determinations in terms of tag numbers or season lengths or season limits, largely based on that information that's biological and herd size. There are factors that are also included in terms of interaction with automobile. We factor in a lot of things. The herd size, the density varies from location to location. So we have deer units that have different bag limits to respond to that. But by and large, we try not to get outside of the science in terms of what's healthy for the herd, what's healthy for the people that are in the same area, and make those things factors that are in both the season and the number of permits that we issue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that. I was just kind of concerned if those bills went through, what your position might be on it as far as going with the biology and the science. What type of herd would we have? Would we, decimate our game here in the state of Kansas, as other states nearby have done? What would be that impact if they were moving the hunting season around the weekend? I guess it is, and Thanksgiving, right before Thanksgiving or right thereafter. And I know it's not the business that's before us today, but I thank you for indulging me the opportunity to speak with you on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for the question.
All right, are there any other questions for this gentleman who never dreamed he'd be standing here this long? You should always pack a lunch.
Oh, I know.
You should always pack a lunch coming to this meeting.
Madam Chair, I always look forward to it.
All right. Yes. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Now I'd like to welcome William Carr, Assistant Bureau Director, Bureau of Water. Welcome to Rules and Regs, and please introduce yourself as well.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is William Carr. I'm the Assistant Director of Bureau of Water with the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about our proposed changes to KAR 281556. This regulation is associated with the Kansas Public Water Supply Loan Fund, which in partnership with EPA, the loan fund provides low interest loan financing to municipalities for public water supply infrastructure projects. Last year, last legislative session in 2022, the statute, one of the statutes associated with the program, KSA 65163D, was amended to remove a prohibition that was there that would not allow the loan fund to finance projects associated with the Water Transfer Act. This proposed regulation change simply aligns the regulation with the new amended statute. The significant change to 281556 is in subsection A. It eliminates the first sentence of that subsection pertaining to the Water Transfer Act prohibition. Now, there are other changes in this regulation, but they're all grammatical or writing style changes that were required by Department of Administration or the Attorney General's office. So in short, the proposed regulation really expands the types of projects that municipalities can use the Public Water Supply Loan Fund to finance for. We do have a public hearing scheduled for these regulations, scheduled for March 21st, 2023. Again, thanks for the opportunity to present these regulations. I would be happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the committee? I will have to tell you that I, being from Hayes and involved with the Water Transfer Act, I read this very carefully last night. And just in case I missed something, I sent it to our city manager as well as commissioners. So I checked up on you.
It's very straightforward.
They were all ready for it, so they appreciated it. So Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was part of the Senate Ag and Natural Resources Committee that heard that bill and recognized how important it is to the city of Hayes. So I appreciate this being done in a timely manner.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that. I don't see any other questions or comments unless someone online wants to say something. And I thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move on now to Clay Barker, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and General Counsel.
Thank you, members of the committee. We have 3 regulations before the committee today, all around elections. The first 2 stem from a statute that was enacted by the legislature last year, 25-2912, which directed the Secretary of State to promulgate regulations on the contents of the statute by January 1, 2023. And the drafted regulations were all put in process. This is the first wave of 2, and there's more coming. That they're back with the Attorney General, who's, from what I understand, a little understaffed and taking a little longer than usual. And this statute includes, depending how you count it, 7 different substantive provisions on election law. It's not one thing, so it's a scattering. The first regulation that came from this statute, the statute requires that voting systems shall not preserve paper ballots in any manner that makes it possible at any time after the ballot has been cast to associate a voter with the record of the voter's vote. And that's pretty expansive language, but it reinforces the concept of ballot secrecy, which has been Kansas law since 1893. From that sentence, we first actually did a 360-degree analysis of where vulnerabilities may exist in our election system, especially with new technology, where someone could, by gathering together different pieces of information, figure out how voters voted. And that is why we created Regulation 729.3, ballot secrecy. It essentially says that 2 different records, which are associated with the more modern tabulators used by some counties, are not public records. Ballot images and any data aggregation, which is essentially a spreadsheet where each ballot is an individual line. There's just a bunch of 1s and 0s indicating how the person voted, but it doesn't have their name, but it has their precinct and other information. Those 2, if you know what you're doing, you can figure out how some voters voted. And these have been requested on occasion by individuals through Cora. To our knowledge, no county has ever given these out because there's Kansas court decisions and a felony law that would seem to prohibit it, but they're not quite on point. We thought this regulation would clarify for the counties that they should never give these 2 types of information out. That's the first regulation, Madam Chair.
All right. Are there any questions? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When you in Part A say ballot images, how would I understand that that's a ballot that's been cast or marked rather than just the ballot image that our county clerk gives us to know how we're going to vote?
Ballot image is a well-known term for election workers. It's when you put a paper ballot in the tabulator, the newer ones, it will take essentially a PDF, a picture of the ballot. So the paper ballot comes out, but the system will store a picture of the ballot. And that's what a ballot image is. We didn't feel we needed to define it further than that because this is telling the counties what they can't give out. And this
So
would be opposed to a ballot style, which is just a blank ballot.
I didn't know the difference between image and style.
You're welcome. Is there anyone else? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Carmichael.
I apologize, Madam Chair. I'm hiding over here in your peripheral vision. Okay. Mr. Barker, I understand what you're doing here, and I don't think I have any serious problem with it at all. I think it's consistent with what I've always thought the law provided anyway. But the one thing that I just ask is a matter of perhaps my own education, the access to ballot images, typically electronic images now of a ballot. They're restricted to post-election audits and recounts. What about an election challenge?
Representative Carmichael, election challenges, there's a separate statute that allows a court,
Right.
25-1447, to direct that any ballot images, anything associated with the ballots can be brought out for an election contest.
And I agree with you that that's what the law provides. That's why I'm trying to figure out why there's not an exception for ballot challenges in 729(3)(a), because it would seem to be in conflict perhaps with this ballot challenge statute. Maybe, and you're the expert, not me, but I'm just looking at it.
Representative Carmichael, I appreciate the question. I think the response is the introduction to the regulation talks about made available to the public, which we were looking more at Cora requests, and that this would be actually a judicial order saying, give us this information.
I recognize and appreciate the distinction. It makes sense to me. Let's wait until we get to poll observers for my next question. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. You can go ahead, please.
Madam Chair, the next regulation has to do with electronic poll book signatures. And this is because the statute used the phrase, the use of poll books not requiring a handwritten signature shall be prohibited. And poll books can either be paper, which I think a handwritten signature is pretty obvious what it is, or an electronic poll book, which are being used by more and more counties because they're faster and more accurate than paper. So we wanted to define what a handwritten signature is for an electronic poll book to make sure it was consistent with Kansas laws on signatures and disability statutes. And so we essentially started that a signature is any mark of assent or agreement, and that a voter can mark it either with a stylus, which is used on the screen, a finger, or an amanuensis, which is a Greek word that I didn't know what it meant 2 years ago until I got involved in a lawsuit where it became important. But that's where someone, especially a disabled person, can designate another person to sign their name. They're not an agent or a power of attorney. They're almost like a physical extension of the person's hand. And that would take care of any disabled person that for whatever reason couldn't actually sign the electronic poll book themselves. And again, this was just to clarify what the term handwritten signature and electronic poll book meant.
All right. I did that exact thing for my father when he was in a wheelchair. So I didn't know the name of it. Can you say that? Pronounce it for me again.
An amanuensis.
Amanuensis. Yes. You can go ahead. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, the last regulation did not come from this new statute. It was from feedback we received from the field, from counties, and it adds to the oversight of poll agents, which is an existing regulation. And there's a provision that poll agents shall not, and it includes things touching and handling voters' ballots, distributing ballots, which is what election staff do, not poll agents, hindering or obstructing voters. And we added in speaking to any voter in the polling place other than a greeting. And the genesis of this addition to the regulation was that some poll agents, especially poll agents are appointed by the candidates or the parties to observe the polling operation, got a little too exuberant, and they probably didn't intend to interfere with voters, but voters started to become in a few places confused as to who the election staff were and who the poll agents were. And we tried to work with language that was a little more in the middle, that you could give a greeting if you were a poll agent or a brief conversation. And the Attorney General said you have to be clearer than that. It needs to be a pretty stark line. So the election staff could go to the poll agent and say, look, you're not allowed to talk to the voters other than a quick greeting. You are there to observe and to keep track of who's voting. That's why they can stand near the poll books when people are signed in. The names are read out loud to them. And it's just to keep the poll agents from interfering with the voters and to give the election staff a little more authority to point out why the poll agents shouldn't be interacting with the voters.
Representative Carmichael has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I used to be a poll agent. Now I'm a poll observer. We made that change 10 years ago or more. And so I've been doing this since before 2000. I actually think this is probably a good idea because it's going to apply equally to everybody. And I know I've stood there observing many times and thought that other poll observers were probably communicating too much with the voter, not only because it can slow down the conduct of the election, but also there's always the possibility that electioneering, heaven forbid, might be going on too, and the poll workers don't have time to monitor every conversation in the polling place. And so I think overall this is a good idea. I'm not exactly sure how to deal with the problem that I've encountered frequently, and that is if I'm observing in a polling place where people don't happen to know who I am, in other words, somebody else's representative district, for example, people will sometimes come up and say, "Who are you? Why are you here? Why are you watching?" Etc. Greeting, of course, implies the initial contact. "Oh, hello, Clay. It's nice to see you here this morning." And that happens all the time. And I don't think you want or intend when that happens. Am I still going to be able to say to somebody, "I'm just a poll observer. If you've got any question, you can talk to the supervising judge over there"? Or people come up to me all the time, even though we have a statute that says I can't misrepresent myself as a poll worker or whatever. People see you standing there and it says observer, and they think somehow you're involved in the conduct of the election. And my usual practice is to refer people over to the presiding judge or whatever. So you need to talk to them. I've pointed out where the bathrooms are to people. People have come up and there should be a greeter, but sometimes they come up and they want to know where they're supposed to go or what they're supposed to do. And sometimes I do say, "Well, you need to get in line over there," or whatever. I don't think you're really out to convict me of an election crime for those types of conversations. But it sounds like the AG said you had to be more specific. Is that how this? I don't know what kind of a question this is. I'm just thinking this through in my mind.
It's exactly what we were thinking, Representative. The original language was a little more expansive, knowing that sometimes a voter may come up to a poll agent and initiate a conversation. And this would not make it a crime. It's just a limitation on what the poll agents do. And in your situation, I would have to trust a little bit to the judgment of the election staff. If someone asks you who you were, you could maybe point to your badge and say, "I'm a poll agent," but you need to talk to the poll worker, or maybe even a very brief, "Where's the bathroom? It's over there." It could be considered a greeting. I don't want to start expanding that term too much.
Yeah.
But this was, I would probably say the most egregious case I'm aware of recently was in Douglas County, I think 4 years ago, where a Republican poll agent was sticking her camera in people's faces. And she had just volunteered the day or two before. They didn't properly vet her. And then she started arguing with people that they should be voting for Trump. And then she started yelling at them in Russian. And the sheriff had to come and escort this person out. We actually had some FBI agents in our office that put their coffee down that day and thought we might drive over and look at this one. That would be egregious and would probably be handled by the current statute. It's sort of the in-between where newer poll agents in some counties just got a little too energetic about interacting with voters. And this just gave the judge some standing to say, "Look, you need to back off a little. Here's the regulation." That was our intent there.
Okay. Well, I have to tell you, when I was reviewing this last night, I thought it was perhaps too narrow, the phrase greeting. And I thought incidental communications, etc. But it sounds like you attempted to accomplish that, but the Attorney General's office demanded more specificity, and hence we have what we have.
Yes, exactly.
And so I guess my opinion is we're better off with it than without it. Second thing, though, about poll observers and conduct in the polling place, which may be more properly covered by some of the existing regulations. Can you, let me give you a specific example, it'll make it a lot easier. In prior elections, sometimes in my county, since we implemented the requirement that you file the poll agent designation form, the practice was that the election officer would then provide each poll agent with a file stamped copy of the form to show that it had in fact been filed. So when they went out to a polling place, the supervising judge, when looking at the form, could see that it had in fact, I think, been filed. Now, if you're about to tell me it doesn't have to be filed, that'd be wonderful, but I think it does. Because we didn't used to have to file them, by the way, which created its own problems. But then our election officer, at least in my county, at least until phone calls to your office, said, no, we're not going to give you a copy of the designation form. And I never really could figure out the why of it. And then the possibility arises that there are some times when I go into a polling place and I'm carrying a poll agent designation, say, for the state treasurer race. And I also got one in my pocket that's for the state senate race. And that has to do with number of people in a polling place and number of observers. And I think there may be something coming down the pike on that. But I guess, do poll observers get something back from the election officer to show that in fact that designation has been filed, so that they can show the supervising judge that yes, it's been filed, and I'm here in the capacity at this polling place at this time on behalf of the state treasurer candidate, whereas I might be in a different polling place, or the next day next day we vote one day except advance vote, but I may be back at some other time and I'm there on behalf of a state senate candidate. Is there anything that tells the supervising judge that yes, it's been filed and that's who they're here on behalf?
Representative Carmack, I don't know how every county may do that differently, but they should get, the poll agent should have some authorization to show that, yes, I am a filed and approved poll agent, and then they get the badge they wear while they're inside the polling place to identify who they are. It shouldn't be a surprise to the supervising judge who the poll agents are. You know, you just can't show up and say, I'm a poll agent.
Well, I guess what I'm focusing on, though, is any of us can run off from our printer and whatever point type, something that says observer and stick it on a label. That's what it is in most places I've been. But I think poll agents need some way, and the supervising judge needs some way to know that this form has in fact been filed as required by law. Now, if on the other hand, the practice would be, no, it's not required, I guess that's okay too. I'm just looking for some uniformity in that practice and frankly, some consistency between election to election, even in the same county, because I know it created conflicts between myself and the former deputy in my county. And so perhaps I'm just saying, I'd like for you to think about that as you're looking at this, so we can have a process that we all understand and hopefully can follow. Back to the regulation.
Representative, could you take a pause? Because
Sure.
we have someone else that has a question.
And then I'd like to come back to the regulation as well. Thank you.
Sure. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Barker, thank you for being before us today. With the language that you have there, maybe this is a suggestion. I don't know if you're amenable to it, but we blow it out a little bit more, saying other than a greeting, and add in some type of phraseology to allay the representative's concerns, and include identification as a poll observer or agent, comma, or referral, affirmative referral to the certified poll worker staff or election staff. I would imagine that in the context, and it would not only give the AG and the judge the narrowness that they want to define, but also give us the latitude for common conversation in general terms that keeps the interaction short. Maybe that's some language that you can add to it or something thereabout. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative will definitely look at that because clearly there's no urgency on this regulation because the big elections aren't for another year. So there's time to work on that. We were just taking our lessons from 2022 and trying.
All right, Representative Carmichael, we could.
I will attempt to be succinct. Directing your attention back to that sub 5 on 745.2, it says speaking to any voter in the polling place. And I don't know if there's a specific definition somewhere of polling place, because I'm also thinking about the forbidden zone outside the polling place where electioneering is not allowed. If I'm inside the door of the polling place, I can't talk to a voter. If I'm standing in front of the door, can I talk to a voter? If I'm standing, what is it now, 200 foot away, 300 foot away, I can't remember anymore. Can I stand out there and talk to a voter? Or is it just a prohibition inside the doors, the physical confine of the polling place?
Representative, we intended it to be in the polling place, but inside the physical confines of the polling place. And I guess I realize in some polling places that can be the exterior door, and sometimes you go in the building and then have to go in another door before you're actually in the polling place, and there should be signage. This would not apply to anything outside that, which is where the electioneering statutes 200 feet would apply to just electioneering, not just routine conversations.
So if I am
monitoring or bake sales and petition signings.
If I am a designated poll agent, if this regulation is in fact adopted, and I think it will be, I can stand right outside the door of the polling place and ask voters questions and all of that. It only applies inside the physical structure. Am I understanding that right? Because I don't want there to be conflict here in another year when I'm standing out there talking to people as they're coming in and going out.
I'll be correct, Representative. This regulation is only intended to be inside the polling place, where you walk in, you're immediately directed to the poll book. Anything outside the electioneering statute would cover, and that's a much more, it prohibits much more limited conduct. That's
right.
Actual electioneering, not just talking.
Appreciate that distinction, and I agree with you. Thanks.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for being here. I'd like some clarification on this with the rules and regulations. I understand we have the electioneering statute, but by implementing it, and I do know there were issues at polling places this year that this would address, could that be confusing that they may interpret that the electioneering statutes are not in place if we're referred to this? Or I'm just afraid that we're creating more confusion by, and this statement really does concern me, that speaking to any voter in a polling place other than a greeting, how are they supposed to help them with their operation of the machines then?
So, Senator, this only applies to the poll agents that are appointed by parties or candidates, and they aren't allowed to help the voters with the machines. That's only the election staff can do that.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so you can't take anybody into the booth with you if it's a friend and they're a polling agent.
Correct. If they're a polling agent with the badge on, meaning I'm here to be an observer, they shouldn't be helping someone at the same time, because that's kind of their duty, is to observe and report what they see.
I'm from a small community and we tend to know everyone, so we wouldn't be offended if a polling agent helped us. If I may refer back to one of the rules, Madam Chairman, ballot secrecy. This has been a grave concern of mine for many years. I go into my polling place and they put a number on my ballot, and they put a stickered number next to my name in the poll book, I assume, or whatever it is. So they know exactly what ballot I cast. There's no secrecy there.
Senator, I'd have to know a little more, but I believe what that is it's the unique mark that must be placed on every ballot. So every ballot gets the same mark or the same number. It shouldn't be
This is an
aligned.
incrementing number based on the position that I came at the polling place.
I'd have to follow up on that because that doesn't sound. There should be no way of connecting the voter to the ballot. Sometimes they'll mark ballots as like a number, a sticker, something to indicate this is an official ballot because the law requires a unique mark on each ballot.
Okay, I'll look into that. Thank you. And yes, I am marking a paper ballot. It's not an electronic machine, so I can see the person putting the number. Thank you. All right. Are you finished with your regulations?
Madam Chair, I'm finished with R3. If there are no questions from the committee, and again, we'll have some more election regulations from this statute that are still at the Attorney General's.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate your being here, not there. I'm going to table the Kansas State Department of Education for various information that needs to be obtained from them. And we'll move on to the Board of Nursing.
Hi, Carol Moreland, Executive Administrator for the Kansas State Board of Nursing. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. I'm here to discuss with you proposed changes to 3 of our permanent regulations that have to do with continuing education. And just to answer maybe a few questions that you've asked some of the other presenters, I'm ready. No. We have approximately 69,000 licensees. It varies because they're constantly renewing and we're licensing more and stuff like that. We have 27 FTEs in our agency. And when we're talking about continuing education, we have approved continuing education providers in the state of Kansas that are approved through us, and there's 93 of those. So they help to provide education to all of our licensees. Our licensees can get continuing education other ways than attending an offering that they have. And just as a reminder, all of our licensees renew their license every 2 years, and they have to have 30 hours of continuing education for that renewal period. All right, these proposed changes were really brought about because of feedback that we got from these long-term providers and our licensees. We've seen a big change, and this probably isn't too surprising with everything we've been through in the last 3 years, but there's a lot more that's being done electronic. You know, there's less paper. And so you'll see some of these that talk about like an electronic signature and stuff like that. We've seen a huge increase in continuing education being completed by independent study. That's no surprise with the pandemic. You know, from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 22, we saw a 70% increase in the number of licensees who completed independent study. And that's just with our providers that we get statistical data from every year. So some of what you're going to see in here are changes because of independent study becoming much more popular. Some of the changes that we put in here for independent study are actually being used nationwide. And we were kind of like behind a situation. So I'll just kind of go through this briefly and see what questions you have. 60-9-105 has to do with definitions. And what we actually added here is the definition of a classic reference. What we have in our regulations is that in a bibliography for an offering, the presenter actually should have books that are more frequently than 10 years old, okay? And publications like magazines that are more recent than 5 years, because we want them to make sure that they're covering the most recent information in this offering. However, there are some times in which probably the classic reference about this particular subject maybe a book that's 15 years old. Okay, and there's been nothing else published since. So we got a lot of feedback that it would be helpful if we had a mechanism in which they could use those. So that's why we added classic reference in here. But we also have in here that less than 25% of the bibliography should be by the use of classic references. Again, we want it to be as current as possible. And then the other definition that we added is one called Mergener formula. And again, I talked about independent study. There's different ways to do independent study, but there's some ways where it's just text only. You know, maybe it's reading journals, maybe it's reading a PDF or something like that. We heard back from our C&E providers that it was very difficult for them to figure exactly how much C&E they should be offering because of that. So we looked at what's done nationally with a lot of the national education providers and the national agencies that approve continuing education. And this Mergener formula is used a lot. This formula is really, it's a way in which you can look at several different things like the target audience, the number of words actually in the publication, whatever, the number of questions, because typically in independent study, after they've done, they've listened to the webinar or they've read the article or something like that, there's questions that follow to question their knowledge and stuff. So one thing that plays into this is the number of questions, and then also the difficulty or the familiarity of the level. Because if it's something that a nurse knows very, very well, okay, versus that nurse probably isn't going to learn as much as if it's something that they're not familiar with at all. It's much more difficult. Okay, it's going to take them a little while longer to do that. So these are all factors that can be played in, and there's actually an Excel spreadsheet that will calculate this for you and stuff like that. So again, we're not telling our C&E providers that they have to do this, but this is another option. The other one that they have for this is pilot testing, which some of them will do. They will have maybe 5 people take this offering, and then they'll look at how much time did it take each person, and then they'll do the average. So that's also an option for them. So that's pretty much the big changes from 60-9-105. Do you want me to continue on, or?
Are there any questions at this point? Yes. Representative Wynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On that, are there, minimum competencies have to be passed in that computation?
No, there's not. No, it's truly the amount of time that it took them. Because remember, with continuing education, it's not the same thing as competency. Continuing education is more than knowledge. Okay. Now, it may be that they get this knowledge and then with their employer, they actually have to go demonstrate some skills or something. That would be where the competency would probably fall in more. But truly, most continuing education, there's few in which they do skills, but most of them are truly knowledge. You're listening to someone or something along that line.
Okay, just when he says questions, they don't have to be answered correctly. They just.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I wasn't following that. I apologize. Yes, there's typically they have to get like 90% or something along that line. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't understand that.
You may continue.
Okay, 60-9-106. This has to do with continuing nursing education for license renewal. And again, we get a lot of feedback from our licensees about continuing education. And we always look at the questions that we get from them because obviously something is not very clear to them. So it might be an opportunity for us to clear some things up. And that's what we did here when we talked about national organizations whose focus is patient safety and improving nursing practice. We actually listed the ones there. Now, does that mean that's the only ones we take them from? No, there's another avenue that they can do. They can submit an individual offering approval, give us some information about the offering, how it applies to them, how they feel that it was good continuing education for them, and we will consider it. However, if they take an offering that's been approved by one of these, a very common one is American Nurses Credentialing Center. You'll see that a lot. If they've taken an offering that's been approved by that, we automatically approve it. So they don't really have to do anything through us. So the feedback that we've got is this would be much more helpful if we actually had the list, knowing that, we may be adding to it with time. That's what we're starting out with. And then,
We have a quick question.
Sure.
Representative Penn.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And you hit on something that I was going to question with the last reg. When it comes to the clearinghouse that you have for the sources of continuing education, is there anything in there that delineates or keeps away certain sources that may push quack science, misinformation, disinformation? I've done some continuing education in different areas as well, and not all sources are the same. You can post up, hey, I did 30 credit hours here, but it's really not a good source. Is there a way for you all to filtrate through that? Is that something that you do as well across the board?
There's really not a way that we can do that other than the information that's provided.
Ms. Moreland, could you make sure you
Oh, I'm sorry.
to the microphone, please? Thank you.
There's actually no way unless we actually can see a little bit more. I will just tell you, I look at a lot of the individual offering approvals that come through. And so I recognize a lot of who's doing it. However, if there's one that comes across that I've never heard of or anything like that, I will do some research on it. Yeah.
Now you may go ahead.
Okay. The other thing that we added to 60-9-106 is we added the need for a rationale statement. And this has to do with that individual offering approval that they submit. They do that online, but we want them to give us a rationale statement as far as how does this meet the definition of continuing education? Because you will see them try to, I don't know, sometimes take some things through us that would really not be with the definition of continuing education. So there's times that we've actually had to decline it, and we give them the rationale as to why, and usually they're okay. The other change is we clarified on page 3 because before we had fractions of hours over 30 minutes. Okay, so we got a lot of questions. Does that mean 30 minutes and over, or truly just over 30 minutes, like 31 minutes, something along that line? So our board decided just to change it to 30 minutes or greater. That seemed to provide some clarity, and I think it will. And then we have some courses that are certification courses that are used a lot, like in critical care units and stuff like that, like advanced cardiac life support, pediatric life support, some of these similar ones. These are ones that they do every 2 years. Their certification is only good for 2 years, but most of these are required for the job that they're doing. So they truly have to do it every 2 years. So we're not going to give them full credit for the renewal ones because it's typically the same content unless the content has been updated in some way, which it is at times. So that kind of clarified that a lot for our providers plus our licensees. They can kind of plan ahead there. So I think that's it for 60-9-106.
Any questions? Nope, you may go ahead.
Okay. 60-9-107 is approval of continuing nursing education. These are really the guidelines for those approvers that are approved through us. I'm sorry. That's those 93 that I talked about, or anybody else who wants to be it. There's always been a little bit of confusion about what exactly has to be on their certificate of completion as far as the information that we require. So we added some language there just to add, certificates of completion. So it's a little bit more clear there. what information needs to be on there. And then on page 3 is where we talked about if they want to use classic references, it can be no more than 25% of the bibliography. And then we also cleared, fractions of hours, 30 minutes or greater. We talked about that. And then on down, it talks about independent study credit can be figured by the pilot test results or the Mergener formula. So that was an add there. And then down to the bottom of page 3, what we've seen since there's been a lot more done electronic, years ago, they would come in for C&E and there would be a roster and everybody would sign in and stuff like that. Okay, with a lot of it being done online, a lot of the organizations have learning management systems, such as if I work for that agency and I sign on to do an offering or something, it's going to keep track of when I signed on and when I left. So there's not really a roster that they sign. So we wanted to clarify it that there would need to be a daily roster, but it really wouldn't be a roster that has to be signed or handwritten or something like that, because so much more stuff is done electronic. And then on page 4, we talked about it can be a handwritten or an electronic signature of the person that's responsible for the providership. Because again, a lot of the certificates that are given out now are done electronically. And so it's an electronic signature. It's not somebody going through and signing all of them. And then we just clarified the statement that needs to be on there. Sometimes we see them come through and they don't have exactly the right language. And we want to make sure that they understand that they have to specify, which discipline would this be applicable for? Because we regulate all 4 of those disciplines. But I think you can probably understand a licensed mental technician does not need the same continuing education as an advanced practice. Okay, so when they advertise it, they need to be very clear about what level is this for. And then same thing, for the advanced practice, we do require that their 30 hours of continuing education has to be at an advanced practice level. And so they need to know, is this going to be at an advanced practice level? Is it being offered at that? So that was kind of to clarify. I think that's it. We tried to make a lot of these changes to clarify a lot of questions that we had. We didn't try to make anything harder or anything like that.
All right. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any. Thank you so much for being here, Ms. Moreland. I appreciate it. We'll move on to the Kansas Department of Revenue. I think we have Taylor Murray, Attorney at Office of Policy and Research. That's a mouthful. Thanks for being here. Welcome to the committee.
Yes, back up. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. And that's right, my name is Taylor Murray. I work for Kathleen Smith over in the Office of Policy and Research, Department of Revenue. And we also have our General Counsel, Jay Buffert, who's available today to answer any questions that may come up. So the Department of Revenue proposes revoking 3 sets of regulations supporting taxes and incentives that are no longer in effect. We'll start with KAR 92-254 and 92-256 through 84. So these supported the Kansas inheritance and estate taxes. Then KAR 92-26-1 through 7, which supported the agricultural ethyl alcohol producer incentive. And finally, KAR 92-27-1 through 5, which supported the biodiesel fuel producer incentive. And I'll stand for any questions you may have. Yes, Representative. Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. My first time
running this meeting. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I know the answer to this because it was in your materials, but can you explain to us why you're revoking these regulations?
Of course, Representative. So as you may all be aware, there are no longer any Kansas inheritance and estate taxes over the last, say, 25 years. There were about 3 that were really in effect. So the last legal effects of these regulations were associated with ended in 2017. I think the last legal effect of any inheritance tax laws ended in 2020. And then for the agricultural ethyl alcohol producer incentive, that expired in 2018. And the biodiesel fuel producer incentive expired in July 1st, 2016.
All right. Yes. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I'm glad to see we're updating the rules and regulations we have on the books. However, I am a little bit concerned that it's taken multiple years since these have been in effect for them to actually be taken off the ruled book. So I guess that's just a general comment that just don't like to see us dilatory in that manner. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in response to that, my understanding was although the estate tax had been repealed, there were still unfiled returns. So these regulations were kept open until that final statute that just said you're not going to have any backward-looking requirements for that estate tax. Is that the case?
That's the case, Senator, and those are the dates I actually gave to Representative Carmichael. So that would have been the 2017 for these regulations, would have been the last legal effect for unfiled returns.
Senator Warren again.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And my point was realizing that the effect of the rules and regs was last applicable in 2017. We are now here in 2023, more than 5 years later, and these null and void rules and regulations have been on the books in excess of 5 years. So that was the point of my comment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And should I? Yes, Madam Vice Chair, we recognize that. I will say that there are some practical reasons to that. So for the public, sometimes it's hard to look up the old or expired regulations. And in cases like think of an amended return or maybe a dispute, when it'd be useful to go back and see what those regulations were. As you can see, there's a bit of a judgment call with things like that. But
All right. Does that answer your question? I have to say that I'm a little alarmed that it would take 6 years to get to this point. And I'll turn it over to Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think before we start getting too critical of agencies and the rules and regs, maybe we should take a look at our statutes. I just got rid of one the other day in committee from 1933. So it's taken a little while for that one to get worked out. So I think, obviously we want to keep rules and regs as cleared out as possible. I'd like to do the same thing with statutes. And 5 years, sure. Would we like it less? That's true. But in the broad scheme of things, I'm just happy it's getting done, and it's not 1933. So there we go. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. I would like to see the legislature do it as well. And there are plenty. I know in one of my former jobs, they had people go through the code books for the city on a regular basis to make sure they took off things like you may not throw snowballs on the sidewalk type of. I know. So thank you. We all need to clean up our houses. And we do have another question from Senator Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to echo the statement of Representative Sutton and yourself, Madam Chair, it is good that we are cleaning these off in, I suppose, as efficient manner as our departments and agencies can. No, this is not 100 years that it has been no longer in effect. It is 5 or coming on 6. So just need to be diligent in what we do, both as a state with the departments and agencies as well as the legislature. And I think that's the point of the comments here today as I see it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think Are there any other questions at this point? I'll just give you, since this was your first time here, we should be roasting you, which we do on the floor usually. However, I'll tell you that the rule is basically you answer only to the chair. You may look at other people. This is like being in a poll watcher. You may greet other people, but I'm the only one who can tell someone they can talk.
Yeah, and I actually did know that, Madam Chair. I think it was just nerves.
That's
just
fine.
wanting to not ignore the representative, but I really appreciate that. And thank you for the welcome.
Yes. Well, if I had stuff to tease you with, I would do that, but I don't have anything. So
These are revocations, so it's a little simpler, but
well, thank you very much for being here.
thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee.
All right. Right now, we just have any discussion or comments on the current rules and regs of all of them. Yes, Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I failed to ask a question of one of our presenters earlier this morning. If this is the appropriate time, I would like to enter into record.
Could you say that again? I'm sorry. All of a sudden, we're in this. Wait a minute, we're missing someone.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, sir.
No worries. No worries at all. No worries at all. This is Behemoth right here. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Ranking. Madam Chair, I failed to ask a question of our presenters here earlier today. I thought about the question after they had already gone. Is this an appropriate time to perhaps ask the committee assistant or the revisor to take down that note and see if we might be able to get back some email feedback?
Absolutely. We are at committee discussion and comments, so it's perfect.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This regards the piece that we heard on the insurance coverage. I think it was let's see. This was dealing with the Board of Healing Arts presentation. There was some discussion about the lower amount of insurance. I think their testimony was that it bakes out to about $276 a year to obtain a $100,000 / $300,000 piece of coverage for those who are going to do independent practice. My question is as follows. Does the lower amount to get insurance coverage, as we just discussed, mean that hospitals or clinics or other entities will hemorrhage talent? As the occupational therapists start up private practices because it's cheaper to insure? And then the second question is of that two-part is, what does this mean for the quality of care in Kansas?
Good questions.
And if you'll indulge me, Madam Chair, I had a couple of questions about another one.
Okay.
This was dealing with the Department of Health and Environment, talking about the regarding public water supply project loan program. On, I believe it's 28-15-56, paragraph A, I guess they rewrote it, so it goes 1, 2, and follows after. Paragraph 2, subparagraph 2 says that no assistance from the fund shall be provided for any of the following, and then it lists a few things. And number 2 says any loan applicant in significant non-compliance with any applicable primary drinking water regulation. I would like for them to define what does significant mean. Seems a little ambiguous. And then the paragraph thereafter is number 3. I don't know what line number it is, but as it reads on my paperwork, it says alternative down about 4 lines down, alternative sources of supply and other procedures if the secretary determines that these changes are required to demonstrate capacity. I guess that's, again, a little ambiguous, and I'd like to know if those procedures include some of the talk that we're hearing about ESG, if that's going to be prohibitive as well. And then finally, Madam Chair, on that same page, the final paragraph says that no assistance from the fund shall be provided for projects or project costs deemed ineligible for participation with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I'm a little unclear on why it is that we are ceding our legislative authority and power of the purse to the EPA in D.C. So I'd like for him to explain that a little bit. That's it, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Good questions. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you. And I certainly don't have any problem with those questions being submitted. But discussion on the first point that you raised, and that has to do with the 1 million, 3 million limit versus the 100,000, 300,000 limit, and the impact that that might have on people who want to be employed in that profession. I think the general concept of the answer would be that people who are practicing in an institutional setting, and you can think of hospitals, nursing homes in particular, and there may be other places, but those institutions want to have the higher level of coverage, what was referred to by our witness as the industry standard, because clearly they have assets there that are worth a lot of money that they want to protect. And because of the number of people who work there, the likelihood that at some point they will have a claim is probably greater. And so those employers probably are going to be wanting to meet what was described to us as the industry standard, and they are going to pay the premium for their employees. It's not a matter that if you go to work somewhere that you're going to have to pay for your employer's insurance. It typically works the other way. The hospital provides a policy that insures you. And I think what the agency is saying, and while I may disagree with the number that they're at, they think in response to concerns like yours, it may be appropriate for individual, if you will, premiums, or excuse me, limits to be lower so that the premium will be lower and hence more affordable, and therefore allow people to engage in independent practice. Um, so I think I used to do this kind of work a long time ago. And so, the world may have changed, but I think that's probably generally the logic, although I still don't necessarily agree with the premium or with the limitation for individuals. I don't need to mention in the notes of the hearing. I understand it's within the realm of reasonable.
Thank you. And I want to apologize to our KLRD people because I did not go through these agency by agency. So let's get started. Does anyone have any comments or concerns to talk to about the appraisal board? Oh, it's my fault because I did not do this correctly. Okay, I don't see any. Now we're down to the Board of Examiners in Optometry. Not seeing any. We'll move on. Kansas State Board of Healing Arts. We did get Representative Penn's comments that we needed to direct to them. Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. Yes, Representative Penn.
Not to belabor the point, but thank you, Mr. Ranking, for that explanation. And I apologize, Jordan, for going out of order. And he's a good guy. The reason that I brought up that concern was in the previous committee that we had members of the healthcare community coming in asking for wage caps because of the workers that were leaving out of institutional practice and starting up their own businesses. And I just wanted to see if that was a discussion that we would have in the future as well, maybe in committee, maybe in this committee, if we're setting sowing those seeds for that ground to be set. That was the genesis of the question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Yes, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since we're back to the Board of Healing Arts, my understanding of the presenter's comments about the $1 million versus the $100,000 was that you may not be able to get coverage for $100,000 if you're a hospital, that the insurance would not be offered, and that what they were doing was offering what covered the costs, but was also the lowest cost available. And we might learn more about that, but I was just saying that was my understanding of the answers from our presenter.
Good to know. Thank you. Good addition. Thank you. Anything else? All right, then we'll move down to Wildlife and Parks. Crickets. Department of Health and Environment. Yes, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My understanding, I know that there were questions about this, but my understanding is that the only really change that's being made is to strike that no assistance shall be provided for any water transfer project, and all the rest of the strikeouts and additions are simply editorial or request from the reviser.
Okay. Yes, please. All right, then we'll move down to the Secretary of State's office. Did anyone have any questions or comments to add to that? I'll add a comment that's completely not involved with elections, but I want to tell the Secretary of State's office once again that every notary that I've seen, and I am one, hates the notary books that they're requiring. And owning a title company, my son has gone through for closing, etc. deeds. He is already on book like 12 just from the start of the year. So and having to keep all those, perhaps an electronic option would be better, and not having to have books and books there. Yes, Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand the concern. In fact, I think even Mr. Barker would tell you that elections officers also aren't real happy to have to keep all of those paper logbooks. At least I know when I go in with my declaration of candidacy and even my poll observer stuff, they have to pull out different books for different purposes and make a record of all of that. I suspect, however, that when we made changes in the notary statute, we may have placed that obligation in some fashion on them. And perhaps our revisers and or research could take a look at that statutory requirement to help us better understand whether it's something that we've done by statute or whether it's something the Secretary has done through regulation.
Thank you. Very good point. All right. Now that I completely took us off topic on that one, we'll move on to did anyone have questions or comments about the Board of Nursing? Not seeing any. We'll move down to the Kansas Department of Revenue. And you might put in there, all of us need to be going over our old and outdated information. All right. We will need to set a tentative date. So I'll turn that over to Jill Shelley, who seems to get the joyful position of trying to herd all these cats together for a meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jill Shelley, Legislative Research. After this, we do have 4 sets noticed for hearing coming up before the end, well, toward the end of the session. The committee would need to meet before April. I would suggest consideration of perhaps the first week of March before things really get ramped up and going again. I'm thinking perhaps a lunch hour meeting could take care of at least most of it. Maybe 2.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Madam Chair. I was asking how many do we have to clean up on? I think it was 2 or 3.
4.
4 sets.
4 now. Okay.
One of them is rather extensive. The big one from
Pharmacy, right? I think we could do that and on a lunch hour. All right, Representative Carmichael.
I think lunch hour is wonderful because I really don't like morning meetings, as some of you know. But I think we're trying, at least in the House, to generally be pro forma on Mondays and Fridays. And I'd suggest that we look to one of those lunch hours, because if we're on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays, we start working more bills on the floor, the likelihood of going into lunch hour is going to significantly increase.
All right. So why don't you send out something and pick a day, and then we'll see if give us two alternates, and that way we can go from there. You can go from there and say, okay, most of them can come on this Friday or this Monday. How about that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will try to get that out as soon as we can, to mark your calendars.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. Was someone else going to say something? No? Oh, Senator Francisco. I couldn't remember where I saw it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A preference for Mondays.
Well, there you go. That's right.
That's a conflict for Senator Tyson. So the idea of, it would be nice to send out choices that include both a Monday and a Friday.
There you go. All right. Is there any other business that should come before this committee? If not, I'll adjourn the meeting, and it is 11:20.